Should everyone be open-minded? Obviously on this show I will tend to speak from an open-minded perspective and talk about how open-minded you should be, and obviously that's the way I tend to be. Do I think it's the way everyone should be? Not at all. There are advantages and disadvantages to being open-minded and closed-minded in the same way that everything in nature works that way. A stone can last millions and millions of years, but if you hit it with a sledgehammer, it may shatter. If you hit a tree with a sledgehammer, it's far less likely to break, but it's not going to last as long. It's obviously going to grow old and die. And it's the same way with us. People with extremely broad ideologies, like myself, will have certain advantages. And those people who are very closed-minded, have very narrow ideologies, very singular ideologies, are going to be much harder to sway on certain things. This is why closed-minded people make better activists. I think I've said things like this in the past. They make better activists. They make better soldiers. They make better, well, a lot of things. Obviously, the military probably wouldn't work terribly well if everyone was very liberal-minded. Obviously, I would love to move away from needing a military, but this is one of those sort of liberal versus conservative things where I think most people, probably most of the people that you ever talk to, feel that the government, for instance, should be of their ideology. I'm a liberal, I want the government to be liberal. I'm a conservative, I want the government to be conservative. And the truth is that either of those ideologies, taken out to their ultimate extent, are going to be disastrous. Or more precisely, taken to, shall we say, stagnation, they are going to be disastrous. In other words, if you had a government entirely based on the ideologies of liberal-minded people or on the ideologies of conservative people, and it was only that way, we would eventually break down for different reasons. Liberals, we would sort of wind up drifting off into Never Never Land, and conservatives, we would probably wind up in something like the Third Reich. Is that because I don't think that either liberal or conservative ideologies are good? No. But what we have to realize when we're talking about those things is that we're asking, shall we say, static questions of a very dynamic universe, which might sound complicated, but all it really means is that society and government works through flexibility. It works through change. Neither a conservative or a liberal government would ever be truly good. What works, and perhaps if you want to say something that's good, is simply something that works. What works is a government that is constantly shifting with the necessities of the day. And obviously we know that due to this little thing we call bureaucracy, the changes of the day often take 10, 20, 30 years to occur. And it would certainly be lovely if a government would move to something a little more efficient. On the other hand, there again, there's advantages and disadvantages. Governments that cannot, like for instance, the American government, is in some ways so bogged down in bureaucracy that it's very hard for something really absurd to happen. Like for someone to suddenly take over the government and say, okay, I'm declaring a state of emergency and I'm putting everything under martial law. You'll see that sort of thing in certain science fiction novels. And that is much harder to do in the American government because those things that keep us from doing all those good things, all those good programs that get bogged down in the bureaucracy, in the rooms full of 100 people that have to make a decision, and of course they never do. Those are the exact same things that also keep us from doing incredibly stupid and dangerous things. And what is disturbing to me, of course, as more of a liberal-minded person, is unfortunately how far we've gotten in the Patriot Act, things like that, which I feel ultimately are somewhat harmful to us, and I'm surprised that they got passed in our government, but they did. And of course, that's just one of those things. That's what fear does. Conservatives tend to be more fearful. Liberals tend to be less fearful. It's not a good and bad thing. If there's a spaceship coming into our atmosphere, big, huge spaceship, the liberals would have a tendency to say, oh, I can't wait to talk to them. And the conservatives would say, blow them out of the sky. Now, which of those responses is correct? Well, obviously it's kind of a Schrodinger's cat thing. You don't know until the box opens. In a way, you could say nothing really is true until the box opens. We don't know if those aliens want to come down and shake hands or shoot us with death rays. And so that conservative view, if that conservative view won over and those aliens wound up wanting to harm us, those conservative people would obviously be the ones you want in control, and vice versa. And you can't know. And this is part of why you always need those people. You need the more fearful people, and you need the less fearful people. The less fearful people are in more danger of just going and walking off a cliff. They also tend to be the more ambitious and exploratory in certain respects. They are the ones willing to step into the darkness, where more conservative peoples have a tendency to hold back and say, let's not go there yet. We need more information. We shouldn't be jumping into this. And so of course they get beaten there by those people willing to take those steps. But the people willing to take the steps die quicker. So everything is advantages and disadvantages. The reason steel is used for strong structures instead often of stone or wood is because it's somewhere in the middle. It has a strength more like stone, a hardness more like stone, but it has a flexibility more like wood, and that's why it does what it does better. It works better for certain structures. Obviously, it doesn't work best for all structures, and doesn't have the longevity of stone. It is the reason that we still have the pyramids. It's the reason that we still have castles that were made 500, 600, 700 years ago, because that is something that will last, I won't quite say indefinitely, but certainly for a very long time. Look at Stonehenge. So when looking at these things and saying, should I be open-minded, should I not be open-minded, I think we need to be what we are. I think that we always need to question it. I think that just as much as a conservative, static-minded person needs to question their conviction and say, do I need to be more liberal-minded? Do I need to be more open-minded? Do I need to have a broader view of things? At the same time, I very much feel that people like myself, people who are more open-minded, who are more liberal, who tend to take the broader view, sometimes need to remember how to narrow it. A personal, shall we say, exercise of mine is any time I encounter, someone like Donald Trump or whomever is making some statement on television that I consider to be utterly, incredibly insane. I have to look at it and say, okay, yes, sure, but why does he think that? Why do people respond to that? What is the reason behind it? And I don't mean just figuring out what it is. I mean thinking like it. Entering into that mindset. Because for me, for the way my mind works, if I don't constantly consider the other side, if I don't constantly trying to think, okay, why are the conservatives correct? Not just why do they think the way they do, but why are they correct? Why are they correct from their perspective? Why is their perspective valid? If I don't constantly try to think about that, I fall further and further and further in my direction, which may not necessarily be bad. But for me as an omnist, omnism really is about understanding all of those sides and truly empathizing with all those different perspectives, not just from a religious perspective, not just from a spiritual perspective. Omnism really is about everything. It is about understanding the universe. It's understanding the way people work and understanding even something like conservatives and liberals. So next time you encounter anyone whose view you find completely reprehensible or annoying or simply opposite to the way you usually think, the very first thing you should do, of course your first thing is to go, oh my God, that's terrible. But let me say the second thing you should do is say, okay, now what if I had that perspective? How would I think? Why would I think it? Because that is the ultimate point, in my opinion, of omnism. Not just pure omnists like myself, but even omnist Christians, omnist Muslims, omnist pagans. That exercise is something that keeps us flexible and keeps us from becoming stagnant one way or the other. Because to me, omnism is about being dynamic. And the questions are not static. Or should I say, neither the questions nor the answers are static. We have dynamic questions and we have dynamic answers. And that's good and it's bad. Like I said before, if you're in a situation where you're not sure which way to go, people of my tendency will listen to one side and listen to the other side and say, oh, well, you know, both sides actually make sense, because they probably do to a certain extent. But those people of this singular view will say, I'm going that way. I've heard your side, you're crazy, you're not. And they go. There's a great advantage to that. There's a great advantage to a mindset that simply goes a certain direction just because. Because the ultimate state of either is stagnation. So in other words, if I take my view out to its ultimate degree, I'm always going to be going, okay, I see everybody's view, and so I can't move. And obviously I don't want to get to a point where I don't move. I also don't want to get to the opposite point, which would be I'm going to go that way no matter what, no matter, I'm just going to take that path. I don't even care about the evidence, which I think is something that we're kind of seeing right now with people of certain mindsets, where they seem, and I'm saying this for both sides, let me say both liberals and conservatives. I see them both sometimes taking these hardline stances on things, regardless of the facts. They've just decided, I'm going to look at this way, and I'm going to look at this that way, and that's it. You'll see this on Facebook all the time about, oh my goodness, how PC we've become. Political correctness is obviously something that has come out of being more and more understanding of other people, but at the same time we become less understanding of other people because we all want them to treat everybody the way we want everyone to be treated. And this is a big thing. I ran into something on Facebook the other day that said some large number, 62 or 72% of all Americans feel that it would be good to basically, I can't remember exactly how they phrased it, but what it came down to was take away the rights of people to say bad things about other people, not bad things, but politically incorrect things. They didn't put it exactly that way, but well, the KKK. That's a great example. White supremacists. You know, you should be able to say, okay, white supremacists shouldn't be able to say what they say anymore and do what they do. And the moment you do that, the moment you say anybody can't say what they're saying, that anyone can't express their view, obviously we can make laws against people hurting other people and doing bad things. But the moment you start trying to limit people's rights to express themselves in any way, you're getting into very, very dangerous territory. And the problem is that I do think a lot of people now are saying, well, yeah, but there's a lot of stuff we can agree on, right? We can agree that racism is wrong. But we can't necessarily all agree on exactly what racism is. And you don't ever want those white supremacists to entirely go away. I mean, uh, that is a weird thing to say. Of course, you want them to no longer be necessary. You want to move to a point, in my opinion, where racism is simply considered an absurdity, because that's how I consider it. It's a silly way to think. But without those white supremacists out there, without those people constantly reminding us exactly what people who hate other people for no good reason are, we can lose sight of that, and we can wind up repeating that. In some ways, having those bad examples is good, and shoveling them under the carpet is a horrible idea, because if nothing else, it really just shoves it down into our brain. After all of us are racist in some ways. All of us have prejudices, and simply, well, there's two major dangers. Number one, we run the danger of taking those and shoving them down and having them become bigger and bigger and bigger, because people aren't allowed to express them, and therefore there's no pressure valve. But the other danger is that if we say, for instance, okay, white supremacists are terrible people, but forget to recognize our own prejudices, which is what we do. We'll say, well, at least we're not Nazis. Yes, I have a little bit of a problem with, say, the rich. I don't like the rich because they have a bunch of money. I don't like the poor because they're dirty and they're filthy and they don't have money, and their kids eat dirt. Whatever that prejudice is, if you look at another person's bad prejudice and forget about your own prejudice, which biblically speaking would be, removing the speck from your own eye, or removing the board from your own eye before you tell someone about the speck in their eye. And this is something we all do. And if you start doing that as a society, which I think is very much what we're doing, this absurdity over the rebel flag, I think, was an excellent example, where unfortunately we said, okay, well, let's take the rebel flag down because that'll do something. And so suddenly everything was about the rebel flag. Everyone was yelling about, oh, the Confederate flag is such a horrible, terrible thing. Let's take that down. Let's do something. And then they felt like they were doing something, and they're not. Taking down the rebel flag does not do anything about racism. Racism is considerably more systemic than that. And it's unfortunately one of these lies we wind up telling ourselves just to sweep problems under the carpet by going after scapegoats. Now, I'm not saying that the Confederate flag is good or bad. It's just a symbol. It is a neutral symbol. People feel different ways about it. I'm not trying to make a statement about that specifically, but I am saying that when we go after some symbol, something that we think is horrible, we wind up missing everything that's right here in front of us. All the things that are perhaps less obvious. And I think liberals do that, and I think conservatives do that. They do tend to do it in different ways. I think liberals will have a tendency to, let's say, fight a battle long after it's won. In some ways, I think even if we were to stamp out racism or a certain kind of racism in America, the liberals would probably continue fighting for it, 20, 30 decades after the problem is resolved. And they would just continue tromping it into the ground and beating a dead horse. I think conservatives have a tendency to do the opposite. They will ignore a problem like racism sometimes. And I don't feel that either one is positive or negative. I think that the reason a lot of conservatives do it is not because they are racist. I know I'm going to get some flack for that, but I don't actually think they're racist. I think they're people that sort of feel, well, we should have moved on, and the best way to move on is just to move on. And not dwell on it, not constantly talk about racism, or just reminding ourselves of it. And so they will have a tendency to ignore things that probably are racist because they are just trying to move on. And liberals will have more of a tendency to title something racist that perhaps isn't, because that's just how their minds are set. So ultimately, they both have their positives and negatives. Both of those mindsets have their positives and negatives. If that UFO was coming out of the sky, like I said, it could be a savior, it could be here to destroy us. And unfortunately, there's no way for us to know whether we need a liberal or a Democrat in charge of the army. I'm sorry, not a liberal or a Democrat, a liberal or a conservative, a Republican or a Democrat, what have you, however you want to phrase that or label it. But it's not a matter of right and wrong. It's not a matter of black and white. This whole open-minded, closed-minded thing, I think most of my viewers probably have more of a tendency to be open-minded, and I know that this is something that we will probably have a tendency towards, looking at people who are closed-minded as being worse than us, and they aren't. Their minds work a different way. We constantly need to try to relate to them. And I mean in our own minds, not just trying to relate to them out in public. I mean in our own minds, come to grips with why is the conservative view positive? What is really right about it? Why is there something good about it? Because there is. There's good to both sides. And you don't want to go down any or either road too far. And I'm sorry, I know that was tremendously babbling, but it is kind of a broad subject. I'll talk about it more in the future. I'm the Urban Omnist. I can't wait for all the interesting comments on this one. And remember, guys, none of this works without you. So, subscribe to our channel, like us on Facebook and Twitter, and above all, don't forget to send me those questions.